the Shadow Warriors, unveiling the most feared Viking elite, forces in history. The morning mist clung to the cold waters off the English coast like a burial shroud, muffling sound and leaching color from the world. It was the dawn of June 8th, 793 CE, and the monks of Lindisfarne Monastery were deep in their morning prayers, their sacred Latin chants rising and falling with practiced rhythm. The Holy Island had been a beacon of Christianity in northern England for over a century, its monastery a center of learning and devotion, where illuminated manuscripts were crafted with painstaking care and prayers rose to heaven with clockwork regularity. Then came the sound that would change everything, a rhythmic beating like the pulse of some enormous heart growing steadily louder across the water. The monks paused in their devotions, confusion rippling through their ranks. Some moved to the windows, peering out into the gray morning. The beating grew louder, accompanied now by other sounds that sent ice through their veins, the creak of wood, the splash of oars, and something else, something that raised primitive fears in men who had never known violence. Through the mist, they appeared, dragon-headed prows emerging from the fog like monsters from the deepest nightmares of collective memory. Not one or two ships, but dozens, their carved beasts seeming to breathe smoke in the cold morning air. Each vessel was packed with figures that moved with terrible purpose, their forms still indistinct in the gloom, but radiating menace that needed no clear sight to comprehend. As the boats struck the shallows, the monks got their first clear look at their doom, and what they saw defied all understanding. These were not merely men who had come to raid their shores. Some wore the complete pelts of enormous bears, the heads pulled down over their own, like hoods' empty eye sockets, staring with borrowed death. Others were wrapped in wolf skins, gray and terrible, with snarling muzzles, framing human faces painted in patterns that spoke of blood and ritual. Their bodies were marked with scars and tattoos that seemed to writhe in the dim light, telling stories of violence that needed no translation. But it was their eyes that would haunt the survivors forever. Eyes that burned with an intensity that seemed barely human, lit from within by fires that normal men could not kindle. As the boats ground against the pebbled beach, these warriors did not simply disembark. They erupted from the vessels like forces of nature given human form. Some dropped to all fours, moving with the fluid grace of the beasts whose skins they wore. They charged up the beach, not like men running into battle, but like predators closing on prey. Foam flecked their lips, and most terrifyingly of all, they gnawed at the edges of their shields, biting the wood with such force that splinters flew. Others moved with an eerie, controlled calm that was somehow even more frightening than the howling madness of their companions. These warriors seemed to glide across the ground, their movements economical and precise, their wolf-skin cloaks rippling behind them like shadows given substance. The monks, men of peace, who had never held weapons, stood frozen in terror. Some fell to their knees in prayer, calling upon God to deliver them from these demons. Others tried to run, but there was nowhere to go on the small island. The warriors fell upon them like a force of nature, and what followed would echo through the centuries as one of the most shocking acts of violence in early medieval Europe. But what made these warriors truly terrifying was not just their savagery, it was their apparent immunity to the normal limitations of human flesh. Monks who found the courage to fight back, striking with candlesticks or farming tools, watched in horror as their blows landed on warriors who seemed not to feel them. Men who should have fallen from wounds that would drop any normal person continued fighting with undiminished fury. They moved with a speed and strength that defied belief, tossing grown men aside like children, breaking down heavy wooden doors with their bare hands. These were not simply raiders come for gold and slaves, though they took both in abundance. These were the berserkers and Ulfhednar, the most elite and terrifying warriors the Viking world would ever produce. Men who had transformed themselves through methods that blurred the line between the possible and the supernatural, between human and beast, between the world of men and the realm of gods and monsters. The massacre at Lindisfarne would echo through the centuries, marking not just the beginning of the Viking Age in Western consciousness, but introducing Christian Europe to a type of warrior that seemed to emerge from its darkest nightmares. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, recording the event, would describe it in apocalyptic terms, speaking of fiery dragons seen flying through the air, and whirlwinds and lightning that preceded the raid. But no supernatural explanation was needed. The human warriors who struck that day were terrifying enough in their own right. The Crucible of the North. Understanding the world that created berserkers. To understand how human beings could transform themselves into the terrifying warriors who struck Lindisfarne, we must first understand the world that created them. Scandinavia, in the early medieval period, was a land that seemed designed to forge exceptional humans or destroy the weak. It was a landscape of extremes where survival itself was a daily battle against nature and man alike. The long Nordic winters were not merely cold, but soul-crushing in their darkness and duration. For months, the sun barely rose above the horizon, casting the world in perpetual twilight. Temperatures plunged to levels that could kill the unprepared in minutes. Food was scarce preserved through smoking, salting, and fermentation, every meal a careful calculation against starvation. The summer growing season was brief and uncertain, one bad harvest away from catastrophe. The physical landscape itself was hostile to human life. Much of Scandinavia consisted of dense forests filled with wolves, bears, and other predators. Mountains rose sharp and forbidding, their passes blocked by snow for much of the year. The coastline, while offering the bounty of the sea, was treacherous with hidden rocks, sudden storms, and tides that could trap the unwary. Even the soil resisted cultivation, thin and rocky, yielding its meager harvest only to backbreaking labor. In this environment, violence was not an aberration, but a fact of life. Resources were limited, and competition for them was fierce. Family feuds could span generations, each killing demanding vengeance that perpetuated cycles of bloodshed. Raids on neighboring settlements were common, both for resources and for reputation. A man's worth was measured largely by his ability to defend what was his and take what he needed. Yet, from this harsh crucible, emerged a culture of remarkable sophistication and complexity. The Norse peoples developed advanced shipbuilding techniques that would make them the masters of the northern seas. Their metalworking produced weapons and tools of exceptional quality. Their oral traditions preserved history, law, and wisdom in intricate poetic forms that required prodigious memory and verbal skill. They created a complex cosmology that made sense of their difficult world, populated by gods who were not distant and perfect, but flawed, struggling, and ultimately doomed, much like humanity itself. It was within this cultural context that the berserker tradition emerged. The word itself tells us much about these warriors and the society that produced them. In Old Norse, berserker appears to derive from two possible etymologies, each revealing different aspects of the phenomenon. The first interpretation, bare cirque or bare shirt, suggests warriors who fought without armor, protected only by their supernatural fury. The second, bare cirque or bear shirt, indicates warriors who wore the pelts of bears, taking on the animal's strength and ferocity. Archaeological evidence supports both interpretations. Excavations throughout Scandinavia have uncovered warrior graves containing bear claws teeth and carefully preserved pelts arranged in ways that suggest ritual significance. The Torslunda helmet plates from 7th century Sweden, predating the Viking age proper, show human figures wearing bear skins and performing what appear to be ritual dances or combat movements. These bronze plates, meant to decorate the helmets of elite warriors, suggest that the bear warrior tradition had deep roots in Germanic culture. But the berserkers were more than men who wore animal skins. They were warriors who had undergone a fundamental transformation, crossing the boundary between human and beast in ways that their culture understood as both literal and spiritual. The sagas speak of this transformation in terms that blur the line between metaphor and reality. Warriors are described as shape-changing, taking on not just the appearance but the essence of bears or wolves. Our most detailed early account comes from Snorri Sturluson's Ynglinga saga, written in the 13th century, but drawing on oral traditions that stretched back centuries. His description remains one of the most chilling portraits of these warriors ever penned. His men went without mailcoats and were as frenzied as dogs or wolves. They bit their shields and were as strong as bears or bulls. They slew men, but neither fire nor iron could hurt them. This is called going berserk. This berserkergang, or going berserk, was not simply a matter of getting angry or losing one's temper in battle. It was a specific altered state of consciousness that transformed the warrior at every level: physical, psychological, and spiritual. The transformation was visible to all who witnessed it, marked by specific symptoms that appeared consistently across different accounts. The physical changes were dramatic and disturbing. Warriors preparing to go berserk would begin shivering uncontrollably, their teeth chattering as if from extreme cold. Even on warm days, their faces would swell and change color, flushing dark red or even purple. Their eyes, normally human in expression, would take on an inhuman quality, described variously as wolf-like, empty of reason, or burning with supernatural fire. They would howl like animals, gnaw on their shields until the wood splintered, and demonstrate strength that seemed impossible for human bodies. The Herald's Kvæði, a praise poem composed around 900 CE for Harold Fairhair, provides contemporary evidence of these warriors' importance. It describes the king's elite guard as containing both berserkers and Ulfhednar wolf warriors, distinguishing between them, but ranking both as the most fearsome warriors in the royal forces. The berserkers roared where the battle raged, the wolfcoats howled and shook their spears. This distinction suggests different fighting styles and possibly different methods of achieving their altered states, but both were clearly recognized as transcending normal human limitations. The Forge of Monsters: Training, Initiation, and Transformation. The creation of a berserker was not a matter of chance or simple genetic predisposition, though certain bloodlines do seem to have produced more of these warriors than others. It was a systematic process of physical, psychological, and spiritual transformation that began in childhood and culminated in the production of a human weapon, unlike anything the world had seen before or since. Physical training began early, often before boys had seen their 7th winter. Those identified as potential berserkers, whether through family lineage, early displays of unusual strength or aggression, or shamanic divination, were subjected to a regime that would be considered severe child abuse by modern standards. They were regularly exposed to extreme cold, forced to sit naked in snowdrifts for extended periods, swim in freezing water until they nearly drowned, and then made to fight immediately afterward while their bodies were still numb and clumsy. Pain tolerance was systematically developed through graduated exposure. Young trainees would hold burning coals, allow themselves to be cut with knives, or stand motionless while being struck with wooden swords. The goal was not to eliminate pain. The Norse understood that pain served important functions, but to transform the relationship with it. Pain became not a signal to stop, but a gateway to power, not something to be feared, but a familiar companion in the warrior's journey. Archaeological evidence supports these training methods. Skeletal remains from Viking Age warrior burials show patterns of healed fractures and bone development consistent with intense physical training from an early age. The asymmetrical development of arm bones indicates weapons training that began before puberty and continued with increasing intensity throughout adolescence. Skull fractures that had healed years before death suggest that even potentially lethal blows were part of the training regime. But physical conditioning, no matter how extreme, was only the foundation. The psychological transformation required to create a berserker was far more complex and profound. It began with the systematic breakdown of normal human conditioning, the social and psychological barriers that prevent most people from engaging in extreme violence. Young berserker candidates were subjected to extended periods of isolation in the wilderness, sometimes lasting months. During these times, they were forbidden human contact and human speech. They had to survive entirely on what they could hunt or gather, using only the most primitive tools. This isolation served multiple purposes. It broke down social conditioning, forced self-reliance, and most importantly, began the process of identification with the wild that was crucial to the berserker transformation. Sleep deprivation was another key element. Trainees would be kept awake for days at a time through various means, forced marches, continuous combat drills, or standing guard in freezing conditions. Modern neuroscience has shown that extended sleep deprivation can induce altered states of consciousness, including hallucinations, dissociation, and increased suggestibility. For the Viking Age berserker trainee, these states were not unfortunate side effects, but desired outcomes that opened the mind to transformation. The spiritual dimension of berserker training was perhaps the most crucial and certainly the most alien to modern sensibilities. In the pre-Christian Norse worldview, the boundaries between human, animal, divine, and monstrous were far more permeable than we understand them today. Shape-changing was not merely metaphorical, but understood as a real possibility for those who knew the proper techniques. Central to this spiritual transformation was the relationship with Odin, the all-father god of war, wisdom, and ecstatic states. Odin himself was a shape-changer, a practitioner of satyr magic, who could send his consciousness into animal form, while his body lay as if dead. He was accompanied by two wolves, Geri and Freki, and two ravens, Hugin and Munin. He was the lord of the Einherjar, the glorious dead who fought all day in Valhalla and feasted all night preparing for the final battle at Ragnarok. Berserkers were understood to be Odin's special warriors, chosen vessels for his battle fury. The god was believed to possess them in combat, filling them with his own divine madness. This possession was both the source of their power and the reason for their strange behavior. They were not fully human during their rages, but composite beings, part man, part beast, part god. The initiation rituals that marked the final transformation from human to berserker are poorly documented, hidden behind the veil of secrecy that surrounds most mystery traditions. However, fragments preserved in the sagas and archaeological evidence allow us to piece together likely elements. The rituals probably took place at isolated sacred sites often caves or grove deep in the forest. Archaeological excavations at sites like Uppsala in Sweden have uncovered evidence of large-scale animal sacrifices, particularly of bears and wolves, associated with warrior cults. The initiate would likely fast for days before the ritual, weakening the barriers between normal consciousness and altered states. They would consume sacred drinks, possibly containing psychoactive substances, though this remains controversial. They would don the skin of a bear or wolf, probably one they had killed themselves in ritual combat. Through dance chanting and other techniques lost to time, they would invoke the spirit of the animal and the presence of Odin. The Volsunga saga preserves what may be a mythologized account of such an initiation. Sigmund and his son, Sinfjotli, discover wolf pelts hanging in a forest hut. When they put them on, they are transformed into wolves for 10 days, unable to remove the skins or speak human words. During this time, they hunt and kill like wolves, learning the animal's ways from the inside. Only after fully experiencing the wolf's existence can they return to human form, forever changed by the experience. This temporary but complete transformation into an animal served several purposes. It broke down the psychological barriers between human and animal consciousness. It provided direct experience of the animal's strength, senses, and instincts. Most importantly, it created a lasting connection between the warrior and their animal spirit that could be activated in battle. The alchemy of rage. Understanding the berserker state. The question of how berserkers achieved their legendary abilities, immunity to pain, superhuman strength, and the capacity to continue fighting despite wounds that would incapacitate normal men, has fascinated scholars for generations. Modern neuroscience and pharmacology offer insights that help bridge the gap between myth and reality, revealing that the berserker state, while extraordinary, was based on real alterations in human consciousness and physiology. The most controversial theory involves the use of psychoactive substances. The fly agaric mushroom, Amanita muscaria, has long been suggested as a possible chemical trigger for berserker rage. This distinctive mushroom, with its bright red cap dotted with white spots, grows throughout Scandinavia and has been used in shamanic practices across northern Eurasia for millennia. It contains several psychoactive compounds, including muscimol and ibotenic acid, which can induce altered states of consciousness. The effects of Amanita muscaria consumption align remarkably well with descriptions of berserker behavior. Users report feelings of tremendous strength and invulnerability, visual distortions that can make one feel larger than life, reduced pain, sensitivity, and alternating periods of extreme agitation and stupor. The timeline also matches saga accounts. The mushroom's effects typically begin within 30-60 minutes, peak at 2 to 3 hours, and last 6 to 8 hours total, after which users often experience extreme fatigue, consistent with descriptions of berserkers becoming weak and vulnerable after their rage passed. Physical symptoms of Amanita intoxication: profuse sweating, facial flushing muscle, tremors, and nausea match descriptions of warriors preparing to go berserk. The mushroom can also induce a state called macropsia, where objects appear larger than they are, which might explain accounts of berserkers seeing their enemies as smaller and weaker than normal. However, there are problems with the Amanita hypothesis. The mushroom's effects are notoriously unpredictable, varying dramatically based on dose preparation, individual physiology, and even the specific mushroom consumed. The same dose that might induce useful battle fury in one person could cause incapacitating nausea or hallucinations in another. It seems unlikely that Viking warriors would rely on such an unreliable tool in life or death situations. Other botanical candidates have been proposed. Henbane, or Hyoscyamus niger, was definitely known to the Vikings and used in their alcoholic beverages. This plant contains tropane alkaloids that can induce aggressive delirium, anesthesia-like pain, insensitivity, and superhuman strength through the mechanism of excited delirium. Medieval accounts describe henbane users tearing off their clothes, a behavior also attributed to some berserkers who fought naked. Bog, myrtle, myrica gale is another possibility. This plant, common in Scandinavia, was used in brewing and has mild psychoactive properties. In combination with alcohol, it might have helped induce the specific type of controlled aggression useful in battle. Some scholars have suggested that contaminated rye containing ergot alkaloids, similar to LSD, might have played a role, though the effects of ergot poisoning seem too unpredictable and often too debilitating to be useful in combat. The most intriguing possibility is that Viking warriors used sophisticated combinations of substances, possibly including all of the above, plus others, lost to history in carefully calibrated doses, developed through centuries of experimentation. Just as modern athletes use complex supplementation regimes, Viking warriors may have developed precise pharmacological protocols for inducing useful altered states. Yet, pharmacology alone seems insufficient to explain the berserker phenomenon. Modern neuroscience reveals that the human body is capable of producing its own powerful drugs under the right conditions, and the Vikings appear to have developed methods for triggering these endogenous systems. When facing death, the human brain initiates a cascade of neurochemical changes more powerful than any external drug. The amygdala, detecting extreme threat, triggers the release of massive amounts of adrenaline and noradrenaline. These stress hormones increase heart rate, blood pressure, and blood sugar while directing blood flow to major muscle groups. Breathing deepens, pupils dilate, and the body prepares for explosive action. Simultaneously, the brain floods the system with endorphins and enkephalins, the body's natural opioids. These compounds, chemically similar to morphine but far more potent, create profound analgesia. This explains how berserkers could continue fighting despite wounds that should have been incapacitating. They weren't feeling no pain. They were experiencing the most powerful anesthesia the human body can produce. The neurochemical cascade doesn't stop there. Dopamine, the reward neurotransmitter, surges through the system, creating a sense of pleasure and rightness that can make combat psychologically addictive. Anandamide, the bliss molecule that acts on the same receptors as cannabis, adds to the cocktail. Oxytocin and vasopressin, normally associated with bonding and social behavior, redirect toward bonding with fellow warriors and aggressive protection of the group. This natural drug cocktail can produce effects that seem supernatural, but are actually extreme expressions of human potential. Mothers lifting cars off their children, soldiers continuing to fight after losing limbs, athletes performing impossible feats in crucial moments, all represent the same system that berserkers learn to activate deliberately. The key innovation of berserker training may have been developing reliable methods for triggering these states voluntarily. Modern research on elite military units and extreme athletes has documented similar phenomena. Navy SEALs describe combat flow states where time slows down, pain disappears, and they perform feats that seem impossible in retrospect. The difference is that modern warriors often stumble into these states by chance, while berserkers appear to have cultivated them systematically. The physical techniques used to induce berserker states can be partially reconstructed from saga accounts and comparative studies of warrior traditions worldwide. Rhythmic movement, especially dancing or swaying, can induce trance states by synchronizing brainwaves. The pre-battle dances depicted on the Torslunda plates may represent such practices. Specific breathing patterns, possibly hyperventilation, alternating with breath holding, can alter consciousness by changing blood chemistry. The famous shield-biting behavior may have served a specific neurological function. Intense pressure on the jaw stimulates the trigeminal nerve and can trigger the release of stress hormones. Modern athletes sometimes use mouth guards not just for protection, but because biting down hard can increase strength output. The rhythmic gnawing described in berserker accounts might have been a method for maintaining and intensifying the altered state. Vocalization played a crucial role. The howling, roaring, and growling of berserkers wasn't mere intimidation, though it certainly served that purpose. These vocalizations affect the vagus nerve, which regulates the autonomic nervous system. Specific tones and rhythms can shift the body from parasympathetic rest and digest mode to a sympathetic fight or flight mode. The animal sounds may have helped warriors identify with their beast spirit, while simultaneously triggering physiological changes. Temperature manipulation appears to have been another technique. Berserkers were famous for fighting naked or lightly clothed, even in winter. Exposure to extreme cold triggers the release of norepinephrine and can induce altered states. The shivering described before berserker rage might not have been from cold or fear, but from deliberately induced temperature stress that helped trigger the transformation. Perhaps most importantly, the berserker state required a specific mindset, a way of conceptualizing reality that made the transformation possible. The warriors had to genuinely believe they could become something more than human, that Odin could possess them, that the bear or wolf spirit could merge with their own. This belief wasn't mere superstition, but a psychological technology that enabled the physical transformation. Modern placebo research shows that belief can create profound physiological changes. Patients given fake painkillers but told they're receiving morphine show real, measurable pain reduction. Athletes who believe they've taken performance-enhancing drugs perform better even when they've only received sugar pills. The berserkers' absolute faith in their transformation may have been essential to making it real. Ulfhednar, the shadow wolves of the north. While berserkers embodied the raw, explosive fury of the bear, another elite warrior class represented a different but equally terrifying approach to transcendent combat. The Ulfhednar, or wolf warriors, were the shadows to the berserkers' storm, the calculated hunters to their raging destroyers. Where berserkers overwhelmed through sheer ferocity, Ulfhednar terrorized through cunning coordination and the cold patience of the pack. The name Ulfhednar, literally wolfcoats, immediately distinguished them from their bear warrior cousins. Like berserkers, they wore the pelts of their totem animal, but the choice of the wolf over the bear spoke to fundamental differences in their methods and psychology. Bears are solitary creatures that rely on overwhelming strength. Wolves are pack hunters that use intelligence, communication, and coordinated tactics to bring down prey larger than themselves. Archaeological evidence for the Ulfhednar parallels that of berserkers, but with telling differences. The Tjengvida image stone from 8th century Gotland shows a warrior wearing a complete wolf skin, but his posture suggests stealth and alertness rather than rage. He carries spears rather than the axes favored by berserkers, weapons that could be thrown from a distance or used to keep enemies at bay. His stance is low and ready, like a wolf preparing to spring, rather than the upright, challenging posture of bear warriors. Grave excavations throughout Scandinavia have uncovered burials that appear to be those of wolf warriors. These graves often contain wolf bones arranged around the human remains in patterns suggesting ritual significance. Wolf teeth and claws appear as amulets. Most tellingly, these burials often include items associated with scouting and hunting, specialized arrowheads, tracking equipment, and lightweight gear suitable for long-range movement rather than the heavy weapons of shock troops. The wolf held a unique and complex position in Norse mythology that shaped how Ulfhednar were understood. Odin himself kept two wolves as companions, Geri and Freki, whose names translate as the ravenous one and the greedy one. These wolves received all the food from Odin's table, as the god himself consumed only wine, symbolizing a transcendence of normal human needs that Ulfhednar sought to emulate. But the mythological wolf that most influenced Ulfhednar identity was Fenrir, the monstrous wolf destined to devour Odin at Ragnarok. Fenrir represented destruction so terrible that even the gods feared it, yet he was also a figure of tragic nobility, betrayed and bound by those who feared his power. This duality, terrible destroyer and noble victim, shaped how wolf warriors saw themselves. The training of Ulfhednar appears to have differed significantly from that of berserkers, where berserker training emphasized individual fury and strength. Wolf warrior preparation focused on group cohesion, stealth, and endurance. Young candidates would be sent into the wilderness not alone, but in small packs, forbidden to speak human language, but required to work together for survival. They learned to communicate through wolf-like vocalizations, developing complex systems of howls, growls, and body language that allowed coordination without words. Saga accounts describe wolf warriors in battle communicating through howls that conveyed specific tactical information, a claim that gains credibility from modern studies, showing that wolf howls carry individual and contextual information that pack members can interpret. The physical training of Ulfhednar emphasized different qualities than berserker preparation. Rather than raw strength, they developed endurance that allowed them to run for days without rest, following the loping pace of wolves that can cover enormous distances. They trained to move silently through difficult terrain, to remain motionless for hours, while watching enemy positions to strike quickly and fade away before organized resistance could form. Archaeological evidence from weapon training sites shows that Ulfhednar practiced extensively with throwing weapon spears, axes, and specialized javelins. They trained to fight in coordinated groups, using pack tactics that isolated individual enemies while protecting pack members. Skeletal analysis shows patterns of muscle development consistent with distance running and quick explosive movements, rather than the heavy sustained combat suggested by berserker remains. The spiritual transformation into the wolf followed different patterns than the bare possession of berserkers, where berserkers sought explosive, overwhelming possession by their animal spirit. Ulfhednar cultivated a more integrated relationship. They sought to think like wolves, to see the world through lupine eyes, while retaining human intelligence and purpose. The Volsunga saga provides our most detailed account of wolf warrior transformation in the story of Sigmund and Sinfjötli. When they don the wolf skins, they find themselves compelled to follow specific rules that mirror wolf behavior. They must hunt alone or in pairs, never in larger groups. They can only attack groups of 7 or fewer men, reflecting the wolf's preference for vulnerable prey. They must howl to summon aid if facing superior numbers, acknowledging the pack's importance for survival. This story likely preserves elements of actual Ulfhednar practice. The temporary but complete transformation into wolves would have served as both initiation and training, forcing warriors to experience the world from a lupine perspective. The specific behavioral constraints, hunting patterns, communication methods, and social dynamics would have become ingrained through lived experience rather than mere instruction. The combat psychology of Ulfhednar differed markedly from berserkers. Where berserkers cultivated hot rage, wolf warriors developed cold fury. Saga accounts describe them as entering an altered state, characterized not by loss of control, but by hyper-awareness and predatory focus. Time seemed to slow down, allowing them to react with supernatural speed, their senses sharpened to wolf-like acuity, able to track enemies by scent and sound in conditions where normal humans would be blind. This cold fury state shares interesting parallels with what modern combat psychology calls predator mode, a state documented in elite snipers and special operations forces. In this state, the warrior experiences emotional detachment, enhanced sensory processing, and the ability to make rapid tactical decisions without conscious thought. The Ulfhednar appear to have developed systematic methods for accessing this state centuries before modern military psychology rediscovered it. The tactical employment of Ulfhednar reflected their unique capabilities, while berserkers served as shock troops, smashing into enemy lines with overwhelming force. Wolf warriors operated as scouts raiders and special operations forces. They would infiltrate enemy territory days or weeks before major battles, mapping terrain, identifying weaknesses, and spreading terror through targeted strikes. Their preferred tactics involved attacking at night or in poor weather, when their enhanced senses and practiced stealth gave them maximum advantage. They would strike at isolated outposts, supply trains, and small patrols, using hit-and-run tactics that left enemies afraid to venture beyond their fortifications. When they did engage in major battles, they often served as flanking forces, appearing suddenly on the enemy's vulnerable sides or rear. The psychological warfare aspect of Ulfhednar operations was as important as their physical effectiveness. The sound of wolves howling in the darkness around an enemy camp, never knowing if they were actual wolves or the more dangerous human variety, eroded morale and disrupted sleep. Finding the torn remains of sentries who had ventured too far from safety created a climate of fear that degraded enemy effectiveness before the main battle even began. Unlike berserkers, who are often described as difficult to control and dangerous to allies, when in their rage, state Ulfhednar maintained tactical coherence even in their altered state. They could follow complex battle plans, respond to changing conditions, and coordinate with conventional forces. This made them more reliable and versatile, if perhaps less terrifying in direct combat than their bear warrior cousins. The social position of Ulfhednar within Viking society appears to have been complex. Like berserkers, they were simultaneously honored and feared. However, their ability to operate in coordinated groups and maintain discipline made them more socially integrated than the often solitary berserkers. Many Ulfhednar appear to have formed permanent warrior bands that served specific lords or operated as mercenary companies. The most famous of these wolf warrior bands were associated with the Vikings, the legendary warrior brotherhood based at Jomsborg on the Baltic coast. The Vikings maintained strict codes of conduct and accepted only the finest warriors, creating an elite within an elite. Their emphasis on discipline, group loyalty, and tactical excellence aligned well with Ulfhednar traditions, and many wolf warriors appear to have found a home within their ranks. Champions of legend, when warriors transcend myth. Beyond the institutionalized traditions of berserkers and Ulfhednar, the Viking Age produced individual warriors whose personal abilities transcended even these elevated standards. These champions combined the trained capabilities of elite warrior classes with unique personal qualities that made them legends in their own time and beyond. Their stories, preserved in sagas and confirmed by contemporary accounts, provide windows into the absolute peaks of Viking warrior achievement. Egil Skallagrimsson, the Berserker poet. Few figures in Viking history embody the contradictions and complexities of Norse warrior culture as completely as Egil Skallagrimsson. Born around 910 CE in Iceland, Egil was marked from birth as extraordinary, though not in ways that would typically suggest a great warrior. He was notably ugly, with a massive head, dark features that stood out among the fair Norse, and a personality that combined volcanic temper with penetrating intelligence. His family lineage provided the first clue to his destiny. Egil's grandfather was Kveldulf Evening Wolf, a man known for shape-shifting abilities who grew stronger as darkness fell. His father, Skallagrim, was prone to berserker rages so severe that his own family feared him. During one such episode, at a ball game, Skallagrim killed one of Egil's young playmates in an uncontrolled fury. 7-year-old Egil's response was not to cower, but to take an axe and drive it into his father's shoulder, forcing the berserker rage to break. Rather than punishing this assault, Skallagrim recognized it as a sign that his son had inherited the family gift for fury. This incident, shocking by any standard, established the pattern of Egil's life. He was a killer from childhood. His first deliberate murder coming at age 7 when he axed another boy who had bested him in a ball game. His mother's response was not horror, but pride. "You have the makings of a true Viking," she told him, words that would prove prophetic beyond her imagining. What set Egil apart from typical berserkers was the combination of battle fury with extraordinary intelligence and poetic genius. He composed his first verse at age 3, displaying a mastery of complex skaldic meters that would be impressive in an adult. This merger of warrior and poet, of destruction and creation, represented the highest ideal of Viking culture. The ability to perform great deeds was valuable, but the ability to immortalize them in verse that would outlive the performer was priceless. Egil's intellectual gifts manifested in multiple ways. He was literate in runes at a time when most warriors were not using this knowledge both for poetry and for magic. He was a skilled lawyer who could argue cases with a sophistication that frustrated his enemies. He spoke multiple languages and traveled widely, spending time in Norway, England, and around the Baltic. This cosmopolitan experience gave him a tactical and strategic understanding that enhanced his natural fighting abilities. The physical manifestation of Egil's berserker nature was dramatic and consistent with other accounts of the phenomenon. Before battle, his appearance would transform in ways that terrified observers. His already large head would seem to swell further. His dark features would become suffused with blood, turning almost black. One eyebrow would rise to his hairline, while the other dropped to his cheek, giving him an inhuman asymmetry. His eyes, normally intelligent and calculating, would become cold as winter ice, reflecting no human emotion. The saga describes retry, in continue edit. The saga describes specific instances of this transformation with clinical detail. At a feast where Egil felt insulted, witnesses watched his face begin to change. His features swelled and darkened. He sat rigid, gripping the edges of his seat so hard the wood creaked clearly, fighting to control the rage building within him. When he finally released it, he didn't attack his insulters directly, but instead composed a poem so devastating in its mockery that it destroyed their reputations more thoroughly than any weapon could have. This control, the ability to direct berserker fury through intelligence, made Egil uniquely dangerous. Most berserkers were forces of nature, as likely to harm friends as foes when the rage took them. Egil could ride the fury while maintaining enough awareness to make tactical decisions. He could choose when to release it and when to hold it in check, though the effort of control was visible and terrible to witness. His most famous battle exploit came at Brunanburh in 937 CE, one of the defining conflicts of the Viking Age. Egil fought in the service of King Athelstan of England against a coalition of Scots Strathclyde Britons and Dublin Vikings. The battle was massive by medieval standards, involving thousands of warriors on each side, and its outcome would shape the political landscape of Britain for generations. When the battle turned against the English and their allies began to retreat, Egil went into full berserker rage. The saga describes him throwing away his shield, gripping his spear called adder with both hands, and charging directly at the enemy's standard. The transformation was complete. He moved with inhuman speed, his face so distorted by fury that enemies fled rather than face him. He cut through the enemy ranks like a ship through water, killing the standard bearer and multiple champions who tried to stop him. But here, Egil's intelligence shaped his fury. Rather than pursuing fleeing enemies as a normal berserker might, he recognized that his spectacular charge had broken the enemy's will to pursue the retreating English. He held his position, allowing his allies to regroup while preventing enemy pursuit through sheer terror of approaching him. This tactical awareness during berserker rage was almost unheard of and demonstrates the unique fusion of capabilities that made Egil legendary. After the battle, while others tended wounds or celebrated, Egil composed a drapa, a formal praise poem for King Athelstan. The poem, which survives to this day as the Adelsteinsdrapa, demonstrates not just poetic skill, but perfect recall of the battle's details, despite having fought in a berserker rage. This ability to shift from superhuman fury to sophisticated artistic creation, sometimes within minutes, made Egil a figure of almost supernatural dimensions to his contemporaries. Egil's physical capabilities during his rages defied normal human limitations. Multiple accounts describe him breaking iron chains, lifting boulders that teams of men couldn't move, and surviving wounds that should have been fatal. Most famously, he survived having his skull crushed by a blow from a smith's hammer, an injury that left his head misshapen, but seemed to enhance rather than diminish his berserker abilities. Modern medical analysis of the saga's descriptions has led some scholars to suggest Egil may have suffered from Paget's disease, a condition that causes bone thickening and deformity. This might explain his unusual skull shape and size, as well as his resistance to head trauma. However, it wouldn't explain his strength, endurance, or ability to enter altered states, which remain in the realm of trained capabilities rather than medical conditions. What made Egil truly terrifying to his enemies was the combination of berserker fury with calculated intelligence and social sophistication. He was as likely to destroy an enemy through legal maneuvering or devastating poetry as through violence. His most famous act of vengeance came not through killing, but through poetry. When his son was killed by a fever, Egil composed Sonatorek, the Loss of Sons, a poem so powerful in its grief and artistry that it's still considered one of the masterpieces of Old Norse literature. This same man, who could compose subtle, complex poetry that moved listeners to tears, could transform into a killing machine that terrified hardened warriors. He lived by a personal code that made him unpredictable, loyal to friends but implacable to enemies, generous but quick to perceive insult, capable of both creation and destruction at the highest levels. Egil's relationship with authority was consistently antagonistic. He feuded with multiple kings, including Eric Bloodaxe of Norway, who outlawed him and set a price on his head. In one of the most audacious acts in saga literature, Egil deliberately sailed to York when Eric was ruling there, placing himself in his enemy's power. Captured and sentenced to death, Egil spent the night composing a praise poem for Eric so magnificent that the king, despite his hatred, felt compelled to spare the life of such a gifted skald. This incident, whether historical or legendary, captures something essential about Viking culture's complex values. Even blood feuds and royal authority could be overridden by artistic excellence. Egil weaponized this cultural value, using his poetry as both shield and sword throughout his long life. Unlike most Viking warriors, Egil lived to old age, dying in his 80s around 995 CE. His final years were marked by increasing physical frailty, but undiminished mental sharpness and vindictiveness. Blind and unable to fight, he allegedly had his treasure buried secretly, killing the slaves who helped him to preserve the secret. Even in death, he ensured his legacy would be one of mystery and violence. Harald Hardrada, the professional berserker. If Egil represented the chaotic individual who happened to possess berserker abilities, Harald Sigurdsson, known to history as Harald Hardrada or Hard Ruler, embodied the Viking warrior who channeled such abilities into systematic conquest. His life, spanning from 1015 to 1066, reads like an impossible adventure novel, yet is documented by multiple contemporary sources across 3 continents. Born into Norwegian nobility, Harald's path to becoming perhaps history's most accomplished Viking warrior began in defeat. At age 15, he fought alongside his half-brother, King Olaf II, at the Battle of Stiklestad in 1030. The battle was a disaster for Olaf's forces. The king fell later to be sainted, and young Harald was severely wounded. But even in this first battle, observers noted his exceptional ferocity and the strange light in his eyes that marked potential berserkers. Forced to flee Norway, Harald began an odyssey that would transform him from a defeated youth into the most feared warrior of his age. He first found refuge in Kievan Rus, where Prince Yaroslav the Wise recognized his potential. For 3 years, Harald studied Eastern military techniques while serving in Yaroslav's campaigns against Polish and Pecheneg forces. Already, his natural berserker tendencies were being shaped by exposure to different military traditions. At age 20, Harald made the decision that would define his legend. He traveled to Constantinople and joined the Varangian Guard, the Byzantine Emperor's elite unit, composed primarily of Norse warriors. The Varangians were more than mere mercenaries. They were the Emperor's personal bodyguard, his most trusted military unit, and his special operations force for the most dangerous and sensitive missions. Byzantine sources describe Harald's arrival with awe. Even among the Varangians, all chosen for their size and fighting ability, he stood out. Contemporary accounts describe him as exceptionally tall and powerfully built, with a presence that commanded immediate attention. But it was not just his physical attributes that impressed. He demonstrated a quick intelligence learning Greek rapidly and showing interest in Byzantine military manuals and tactical innovations. In Byzantine service, Harald's natural berserker abilities found their perfect expression within a professional military framework. The empire's systematic approach to warfare, with its emphasis on disciplined logistics and combined arms tactics, didn't suppress his fury, but channeled it. He learned to deploy his berserker rage tactically as one tool among many, rather than his only response to combat. For over a decade, Harald fought across the Byzantine Empire's vast territory. He campaigned in Sicily against Arab forces where he learned siege warfare and naval tactics. He fought in Bulgaria, suppressing revolts with a brutality that impressed even Byzantine chroniclers accustomed to violence. He served in Syria and Palestine, where he reportedly made a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, while simultaneously conducting military operations against desert nomads. Each campaign added to his repertoire. From Arab forces, he learned the value of light cavalry and psychological warfare. From Bulgarian rebels, he learned guerrilla tactics and how to counter them. From Italian city-states, he learned advanced siege techniques and the use of specialized equipment. All these lessons were filtered through his Norse warrior background and berserker capabilities, creating a uniquely formidable military mind. The wealth Harold accumulated in Byzantine service was staggering. The Varangians received special privileges, including the right to plunder the imperial treasury upon an emperor's death, limited only by what they could carry. Harold served through multiple imperial transitions and proved exceptionally capable at carrying. He also received regular pay and gold bonuses for successful missions and a share of all plunder from campaigns. But Harold's time in Byzantine service was marked by more than just military accomplishments. He became involved in imperial politics, allegedly having an affair with the Empress Zoe, and certainly playing a role in the palace coup that brought Constantine IX into power in 1042. His position became increasingly precarious as his wealth and influence grew, leading to his decision to leave Constantinople around 1044. The journey back to Scandinavia became another opportunity for profit and military innovation. Harold and his followers raided along the entire route, but these were not simple Viking raids. He employed Byzantine siege techniques, used Greek fire in naval combat, and demonstrated a strategic understanding that allowed him to extract maximum profit with minimum risk. Arriving in Scandinavia in 1045, Harold was no longer just a warrior with berserker abilities, but a military professional with experience across the known world. He used his vast wealth to claim the Norwegian throne, becoming co-ruler with his nephew Magnus. When Magnus conveniently died in 1047, Harold became sole king, earning his nickname Hardrada through ruthless consolidation of power. As King Harold revolutionized Norwegian military organization, he created Scandinavia's first truly professional army, men who trained year-round rather than seasonally. He introduced Byzantine administrative practices, established a more efficient tax system, and built a navy that incorporated design elements from various maritime traditions he'd encountered. But the berserker never fully disappeared beneath the king. Contemporary accounts describe moments when the old fury would surface. During his long war with Denmark, Harold would sometimes abandon royal dignity to lead charges, personally fighting with an axe like his Viking ancestors. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle notes that at the Battle of Nyssa in 1062, Harold fought with such fury that Danish warriors preferred drowning to facing him. Harold's final campaign, the invasion of England in 1066, demonstrated both his strategic genius and the ultimate limitations of berserker warfare in a changing world. His initial success was spectacular. Landing with 300 ships and perhaps 9,000 warriors, he crushed the first English force sent against him at Fulford. His reputation was such that many English nobles considered submission rather than resistance. At Stamford Bridge on September 25, 1066, Harold faced King Harold Godwinson's force-marched army. The battle became the last great clash of Viking Age warfare. Initially caught by surprise, Harold rallied his forces with a display of berserker fury that momentarily turned the tide. Wearing his famous blue tunic called Emma and wielding his two-handed axe, he carved through the English lines with skill that seemed supernatural. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, written by Harold's enemies, nevertheless records his prowess with something approaching awe. The King of Norway fought most manfully, but was killed by an arrow to the throat. His fall marked not just the end of a legendary warrior, but symbolically closed the Viking Age itself. Within weeks, Harold Godwinson would fall to Norman arrows at Hastings, and the world that produced warriors like Harald Hardrada would begin its transformation into something new. Thorkel, the High Master of the Wolf Pack, the third of our legendary warriors, represents yet another variation on Viking military excellence. Thorkel the High emerged from the sources around 1009 as the leader of the Vikings, one of history's most unusual military organizations, where Egil was the chaotic individual and Harold, the imperial conqueror. Thorkel embodied the professional warrior who maintained independence while serving power. The Vikings were essentially a warrior corporation based at the semi-legendary fortress of Jomsborg, somewhere on the Baltic coast. They followed strict codes that prohibited showing fear, required members to avenge fallen comrades, and forbade quarrels within the Brotherhood. They accepted only warriors who could defeat a current member in single combat, creating a meritocracy of violence where leadership went to the most capable rather than the best born. Thorkel's rise to leadership of such an organization tells us much about his capabilities. Physical descriptions consistently emphasize his height, with some accounts suggesting he stood close to 7 feet tall. While this may be exaggeration, archaeological evidence from the period shows that elite warriors were indeed often significantly taller than average, likely due to better nutrition in childhood and natural selection for size in combat. But height alone didn't make one leader of the Vikings. Thorkel had to possess exceptional combat skills, tactical intelligence, and most importantly, the ability to command respect from some of the most dangerous men in the Norse world. Unlike berserkers, who might be feared but difficult to follow, Thorkel inspired loyalty through a combination of personal prowess and strategic brilliance. His first appearance in detailed historical records comes during the Viking invasion of England from 1009 to 1912. Thorkel led a force that various sources number between 3,000 and 5,000 warriors, an enormous army by the period's standards. What distinguished this force from typical Viking raids was its systematic nature. This was not a series of hit-and-run attacks, but a coordinated campaign designed to extract maximum tribute from the English. The campaign demonstrated military professionalism of the highest order. Thorkel's forces established secure bases, maintained supply lines, gathered intelligence on English responses, and struck where resistance was weakest. When faced with strong opposition, they avoided decisive battle, preferring to maintain their force intact while wearing down English resources and will. The Siege of Canterbury in 1011 showcased both Thorkel's military effectiveness and the limits of his control over warriors accustomed to independence. After successfully taking the city and capturing Archbishop Elfhea, Thorkel's men demanded an enormous ransom. When the Archbishop refused to allow his people to be impoverished for his freedom, a drunken faction of Vikings killed him by pelting him with bones and ox heads during a feast. This incident proved pivotal for Thorkel. Sources record that he tried desperately to save the Archbishop, offering everything he owned except his ship to spare the holy man's life. When his own warriors defied him and murdered Elfhea anyway, Thorkel made a decision that shocked the Viking world. He took his personal following, reportedly 45 ships and their crews, and entered English service. This decision reveals the complex honor code that governed elite Viking warriors. Thorkel was not betraying his culture, but following a deeper principle that valued courage and honor above ethnic loyalty. The archbishop had shown courage in refusing ransom honor in protecting his people. His murder violated the unwritten rules that distinguished warriors from mere murderers. By switching sides, Thorkel demonstrated that his loyalty was to warrior principles rather than tribal identity. In English service, Thorkel proved as effective against his former allies as he had been alongside them. His intimate knowledge of Viking tactics, combined with his reputation, made him invaluable to King Ethelred, and later to Knut. When Viking forces learned Thorkel opposed them, their confidence wavered. Some accounts suggest entire raids were abandoned rather than face the legendary warrior. What made Thorkel particularly effective was his synthesis of Viking and English military methods. He introduced English forces to Viking mobility and aggression, while incorporating English organizational methods into his own forces. His troops became known for their ability to fight effectively, both as infantry in shield walls and as mobile raiders, switching between modes as tactical situations demanded. The financial rewards of his service were substantial. Thorkel received vast estates, regular payments in silver, and political influence at the highest levels. But wealth seems not to have been his primary motivation. Contemporary accounts emphasize his concern with reputation and honor, the fundamental currencies of Viking warrior culture. When Canute became King of England, he initially distrusted Thorkel, despite, or perhaps because of his military capabilities. The relationship between the two great warriors was complex, marked by mutual respect and suspicion. Canute eventually reconciled with Thorkel, making him Earl of East Anglia and one of the most powerful men in England. Thorkel's later years are less well documented. He apparently returned to Denmark around 1023, possibly as Canute's regent, though some sources suggest another falling out with the king. His death date is uncertain, sometime between 1023 and 1025, but his legacy, as perhaps the greatest Viking military commander, endured. What distinguished Thorkel from berserkers and other Viking warriors was his ability to think strategically while maintaining tactical excellence. He could plan campaigns that lasted months, coordinate forces across hundreds of miles, and adapt to changing political situations. Yet when battle came, he led from the front with personal combat skills that matched any warrior of his age. The neuroscience of transcendence, understanding the impossible. The extraordinary capabilities displayed by berserkers, Ulfhednar, and legendary champions raise fundamental questions about human potential. Modern neuroscience and psychology offer insights that help bridge the gap between mythical-seeming accounts and biological reality, revealing that these warriors accessed genuine human capabilities through methods we're only beginning to understand. At the most basic level, the berserker state represents an extreme activation of what biologists call the acute stress response, commonly known as fight or flight. But berserkers didn't simply experience this response. They cultivated, intensified, and directed it in ways that pushed human capability to its absolute limits. When the brain perceives extreme threat, it initiates a cascade of changes that can seem almost magical in their effects. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis activates, flooding the system with hormones that fundamentally alter how the body functions. Cortisol mobilizes energy reserves, converting stored glycogen to glucose and making vast amounts of fuel available to muscles. Adrenaline and noradrenaline increase heart rate and blood pressure, while simultaneously improving reaction time and strength. But the neurochemical story goes much deeper. The brain releases endogenous opioids, beta-endorphins, enkephalins, and dynorphins that are far more powerful than any painkiller humans have synthesized. These compounds don't just reduce pain, they can eliminate it entirely, allowing function despite injuries that should be incapacitating. This explains accounts of berserkers fighting with wounds that would drop normal warriors. Simultaneously, the brain floods with dopamine, creating a reward sensation that can make combat addictive. Cannabinoid receptors activate producing effects similar to marijuana. Oxytocin and vasopressin, normally associated with bonding and social behavior, redirect toward group cohesion and aggressive protection. The entire neurochemical orchestra plays a symphony of enhanced capability. Modern research on soldiers and extreme athletes has documented states remarkably similar to historical berserker accounts. Time dilation, where seconds seem to stretch into minutes, allows for seemingly superhuman reaction speeds. Hysterical strength permits mothers to lift cars off children and soldiers to carry wounded comrades distances that should be impossible. These aren't myths, but documented phenomena that berserkers learned to access deliberately. The physical transformations described in sagas also have neurological explanations. Extreme sympathetic activation causes visible changes, including facial flushing, pupil dilation, and altered blood flow patterns that can make faces appear swollen or distorted. Piloerection, where body hair stands on end, would be especially dramatic for warriors wearing animal pelts. Muscle tremors from adrenaline overload create the shaking described before berserker attacks. Temperature regulation radically alters during these states. The body becomes capable of generating tremendous heat, explaining how berserkers could fight naked in winter. Brown adipose tissue activates, literally burning fat, to create warmth. Blood flow redirects to major muscle groups and away from the skin, creating a natural armor against cold while improving strength and endurance. But perhaps most remarkably, the brain's information processing fundamentally changes. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function and impulse control, shows decreased activity. Meanwhile, the motor cortex and cerebellum become hyperactive. This creates a state where complex physical actions can be performed without conscious thought, explaining the flowing, almost supernatural combat abilities described in accounts. Memory formation also alters dramatically. The hippocampus, crucial for creating declarative memories, functions poorly under extreme stress. But the amygdala, which encodes emotional and procedural memories, becomes hyperactive. This explains why berserkers often couldn't recall specific actions, but retained trained combat techniques. They were literally operating from a different memory system. The role of belief and expectation cannot be overlooked. The placebo effect demonstrates that belief alone can create measurable physiological changes. Modern studies show that athletes who believe they've taken performance enhancers show improved performance even with sugar pills. For berserkers, absolute faith in their transformation likely amplified the physiological changes, creating a feedback loop between belief and biology. Cultural conditioning played a crucial role in shaping how these states manifested. Where modern soldiers experiencing similar states might feel disturbed or traumatized, Viking warriors interpreted them as divine possession or animal transformation. This positive framing allowed them to embrace rather than resist the experience, potentially deepening and enhancing the effects. The question of psychoactive substances remains contentious but plausible. While Amanita muscaria and other proposed substances could certainly alter consciousness, they may have served more as triggers or enhancers rather than primary causes. A small dose of psychoactives combined with ritual preparation and psychological expectation could catalyze the body's own neurochemical cascade. Recent research on meditation and breathwork provides another piece of the puzzle. Specific breathing patterns can dramatically alter blood chemistry and trigger altered states. The pre-battle rituals described in sagas, including rhythmic movement, vocalization, and possibly hyperventilation, align with techniques known to induce trance states. These methods could reliably trigger the neurochemical cascade without external substances. The social and group dynamics of berserker bands also have neurological implications. Mirror neurons cause humans to unconsciously mimic those around them. In a group of warriors entering altered states, each individual's transformation would be amplified by observing others. Group coherence at the neurological level has been documented in activities from music to sports, suggesting berserker bands might have achieved a form of collective consciousness. The long-term costs of regularly accessing these states were likely severe. Chronic activation of stress systems leads to numerous health problems, including cardiovascular disease, immune dysfunction, and neurological damage. The saga accounts of berserkers becoming weak after their fury and dying, relatively young, align with what we'd expect from repeated extreme stress exposure. Modern military research has identified conditions remarkably similar to berserker descriptions. Some soldiers in sustained combat develop what's been termed the combat addiction syndrome, craving the neurochemical high of battle. Others experience berserker-like rages under extreme stress, displaying strength and aggression beyond normal human ranges. The difference is that modern military training generally seeks to prevent rather than cultivate these states. Elite athletes provide another parallel. Ultra-marathoners describe states where pain disappears and they feel capable of running forever. Free climbers report time dilation and perfect clarity while making moves that should be impossible. Mixed martial arts fighters describe flow states where they act without conscious thought, their training taking over completely. These are the same states berserkers cultivated, just directed toward different ends. The ethical implications of this research are profound. If humans can indeed access such enhanced states, should we develop systematic methods for doing so? Military applications are obvious. But what about emergency responders, surgeons, or others who could benefit from enhanced performance under stress? Where is the line between optimization and dangerous enhancement? The berserkers force us to confront uncomfortable questions about human nature and potential. They demonstrated that the boundaries of human capability are far more flexible than commonly believed. Through training, belief, and possibly pharmaceutical assistance, they accessed states that seemed supernatural to observers, but were actually extreme expressions of natural human capacity. Their legacy challenges modern assumptions about progress. We often assume we've advanced beyond our ancestors in all ways, but in the realm of combat performance and altered states, we may have actually regressed. Our comfortable, safe societies rarely require us to access our full potential. The berserkers, for all their violence and ultimate obsolescence, achieved a mastery of human combat capability that remains unmatched. The twilight of the berserkers, death of the old gods. The decline and disappearance of berserkers, Ulfhednar, and the warrior culture that produced them was not a simple matter of military defeat or tactical obsolescence. It was a profound transformation that struck at the very roots of Norse society, involving changes in religion, law, social organization, and the fundamental understanding of what it meant to be human. The arrival of Christianity in Scandinavia brought more than just a new god. It brought an entirely different cosmology that had no place for the warrior practices that had defined Norse culture for centuries. Where the old religion saw shape changing as possible, divine possession as desirable, and battle fury as sacred, Christianity viewed all these as demonic, sinful, or insane. The transformation began at the top, as Scandinavian kings converted to Christianity, often for political reasons. Initially, they found the new religion offered advantages beyond trade relations with Christian kingdoms. Christianity's emphasis on centralized authority, divine right of kings, and obedience to earthly powers aligned perfectly with royal ambitions to consolidate power. Berserkers and Ulfhednar, with their direct connection to Odin and independence from traditional authority, represented a threat to Christianizing kings. These warriors owed their loyalty to war bands and warrior codes rather than royal decree. Their very existence challenged the monopoly on violence that emerging state structures required. The legal assault on berserker traditions was swift and comprehensive. Iceland's Gragas law code explicitly outlawed berserkergang, stating, "If a man goes berserk, he is punished with a lesser outlawry." And the same applies to those who are present if they do not bind him. Those who help him are punished with full outlawry. This transformed what had been an honored, even sacred practice into a criminal act. Similar laws appeared throughout Scandinavia. Norway's Christian law codes prescribed death for those who practiced shape-changing or claimed to become animals. Denmark outlawed the berserker practice of holmgang, formal dueling, which had been one of the primary ways berserkers maintained their status and resolved disputes. Sweden banned the wearing of animal skins in battle and the rituals associated with warrior cults. Archaeological evidence shows the systematic destruction of sites associated with berserker and Ulfhednar traditions. Sacred groves were cut down, with churches often built on the same sites. Weapon sacrifices where arms were ritually killed by bending or breaking and deposited in bogs or lakes ceased abruptly. The material culture that had supported warrior transformations was literally buried. The ideological assault was equally thorough. Missionaries and Christian scalds reframed berserkers from divine warriors to demon-possessed madmen. The sagas, mostly written down by Christians centuries after the events they describe, show this transformation clearly. In early heroic poetry, berserkers are usually protagonists or valued retainers. In later sagas, they become stock villains, rapists, and murderers who are righteously killed by Christian heroes. This narrative transformation had profound psychological effects. Young warriors who might once have aspired to berserker status now saw it as shameful and damning. The belief system that enabled the transformation, faith in Odin's possession and animal spirits, was systematically undermined. Without belief, the psychological technologies that created berserker states became ineffective. Military evolution also played a crucial role. The 11th and 12th centuries saw significant changes in warfare throughout Europe. Improved armor, particularly chainmail, becoming more common, reduced the effectiveness of the wild charges that were berserkers' specialties. Disciplined infantry formations, inspired by Byzantine and Western European models, could trap and destroy individual warriors, no matter how fierce. The increasing importance of cavalry further marginalized berserker tactics. Mounted armored knights represented a form of military power that infantry berserkers couldn't match. The psychological impact of a berserker charge meant little against warriors encased in steel atop war horses. The very ground of battle had shifted in ways that made berserker methods obsolete. Castle fortifications spread throughout Scandinavia, changing warfare from open field battles where individual prowess mattered to prolonged sieges where engineering and logistics determined victory. Berserker fury was useless against stone walls. The patient craft of siege warfare required entirely different military virtues than those cultivated by warrior cults. Perhaps most significantly, the economic basis of Viking society transformed. The raid and trade economy that had sustained warrior bands gave way to settled agriculture and centralized kingdoms. Young men who once might have joined Viking expeditions to win fame and fortune increasingly had other options. The social niche that produced professional warriors narrowed and eventually closed. The last historically documented berserkers appear in the 13th century, already portrayed as anachronisms. Egil's saga, despite celebrating its berserker protagonist, was written in a Christian context that framed his transformation as problematic. The few berserkers who appear in late sagas are usually obstacles for heroes to overcome, not heroes themselves. One of the last detailed accounts comes from Grettis saga, where the protagonist faces a berserker named Snækall. The berserker is portrayed as a brutal criminal who abuses his strength to rob and rape. Grettir defeats him through cunning rather than matching fury, symbolically showing the superiority of intelligence over blind rage. The saga's message is clear. The age of berserkers has passed, and good riddance. The transformation of Scandinavia's warrior culture can be traced through art and material culture. Early Viking Age artwork frequently depicts warriors with animal characteristics, men with wolf heads, bear warriors, in ritual poses, shape-changing scenes. By the late Viking Age, these motifs disappear, replaced by Christian imagery or purely human warriors. Weapon design evolved to reflect changing combat styles. The long-handled axes favored by berserkers gave way to swords more suitable for formation fighting. Shields became larger and stronger, designed for defensive formations rather than the lighter shields berserkers bit and cast aside. Even armor changed with heavier protection, replacing the mobility berserkers prized. The social institutions that had created and sustained elite warriors also transformed. The warrior bands that had served as training grounds and social homes for berserkers were replaced by royal households with formal hierarchies. The gift economy that rewarded prowess with arm rings and honor gave way to land grants and formal titles that demanded stability rather than fury. Educational changes played a subtle but important role. As literacy spread with Christianity, the oral culture that had preserved berserker traditions weakened. Young nobles learned Latin letters rather than runic wisdom. They read of Christian martyrs rather than hearing of Odin's warriors. The stories that shaped imagination and aspiration fundamentally changed. The medical understanding of berserker states shifted dramatically. What had once been seen as divine possession or noble transformation became viewed as illness or demonic influence. The same behaviors that had marked great warriors now indicated need for exorcism or confinement. This reframing made it socially impossible to cultivate berserker abilities openly. Even the understanding of courage itself transformed. Viking Age courage was often expressed through spectacular, individual actions: the heroic charge, the berserk fury, the refusal to retreat. Christian courage emphasized patient endurance, martyrdom, and obedience to authority. The wild independence of berserkers had no place in this new value system. The gender dynamics surrounding berserkers also shifted. Viking Age culture, while male-dominated, had recognized certain female roles in warrior culture, including Valkyries, shield maidens, and the mothers who praised sons for violence like Egil's mother. Christianity brought more rigid gender roles that excluded women from any association with warfare, removing an important element of social support for warrior culture. By 1300, the transformation was complete. Scandinavia had become part of Christian Europe, with knights' castles and formal military hierarchies replacing the wild warriors of the Viking Age. The berserkers survived only in stories increasingly distorted by time and changing values. The living tradition that had created them was extinct, yet traces remained in folklore and popular memory. Stories of men who could become wolves persisted eventually, influencing the werewolf legends of medieval Europe. The word berserk entered multiple languages, though its meaning shifted to simple, uncontrolled anger rather than sacred fury. The fascination with these warriors endured even as understanding of their reality faded. The demise of the berserkers represents one of history's most complete cultural transformations. Within a few centuries, practices that had been central to Norse identity became not just abandoned, but actively suppressed and forgotten. The psychological technologies that had allowed warriors to transcend normal human limitations were lost, surviving only as fragments in sagas and archaeological remains. This transformation raises profound questions about cultural loss and human potential. The berserkers were undoubtedly violent, their practices often brutal by any standard. Yet they also represented a systematic exploration of human capability that achieved results we still struggle to explain. In suppressing them, did medieval Scandinavia gain civilization at the cost of certain human potentials? Shadows and legacy, the berserkers' enduring impact. Though the last true berserker fell centuries ago, their influence extends far beyond their historical moment, shaping literature, military thinking, popular culture, and our understanding of human potential. The shadow they cast is long and complex, inspiring both fascination and revulsion, imitation and rejection. In literature, the berserker archetype has proven remarkably durable. From the medieval romances that transformed them into werewolves to modern fantasy epics, writers have drawn on the image of warriors who transcend human limitations through fury. Tolkien's Bjorn the Skin Changer, who fights as a bear in The Hobbit, directly channels berserker traditions. Robert E. Howard's Conan enters fighting rages clearly inspired by berserker accounts. Modern popular culture has embraced and transformed the berserker concept. Video games routinely feature berserker modes where characters gain enhanced strength and speed at the cost of defense or control. The image resonates with something deep in human psychology, the desire to break free from limitations, to access hidden reserves of power, to become more than merely human. But the berserker legacy extends beyond entertainment into serious military thinking. Modern special operations forces study historical elite warriors, including berserkers, for insights into combat psychology and performance enhancement. The U.S. military's research into flow states and combat effectiveness draws on principles the Vikings understood intuitively. The Navy SEALs' infamous Hell Week where trainees are pushed to physical and mental extremes through sleep deprivation, cold exposure, and constant physical challenges, bear striking resemblance to berserker training methods. The goal is similar, breaking down normal limitations to rebuild warriors capable of extraordinary performance. The methods are more scientific and controlled, but the underlying principle remains constant. Modern combat veterans describe experiences remarkably similar to berserker accounts. Time dilation during firefights, hysterical strength when saving wounded comrades, the ability to function despite severe wounds, all parallel saga descriptions. The difference lies not in the phenomena, but in how they're understood and integrated. Where Vikings saw divine possession, modern military psychology sees flow states and stress-induced analgesia. Sports psychology has independently rediscovered many berserker principles. Elite athletes use visualization, ritual preparation, and controlled breathing to access enhanced performance states. The zone described by athletes shares neurological features with berserker: fury, time distortion, pain, suppression, and the ability to perform beyond normal capacity. Modern science provides different explanations, but the human experience remains remarkably consistent. The pharmaceutical aspect of berserker practice has influenced modern military enhancement research. Programs exploring modafinil for sleep deprivation, amphetamines for alertness, and beta blockers for stress reduction echo Viking experimentation with consciousness-altering substances. The retry in continue edit. The pharmaceutical aspect of berserker practice has influenced modern military enhancement research. Programs exploring modafinil for sleep deprivation, amphetamines for alertness, and beta blockers for stress reduction echo Viking experimentation with consciousness-altering substances. The ethical debates surrounding military enhancement drugs mirror questions about berserker practices. Where is the line between optimization and dangerous transformation? Modern neuroscience has validated many aspects of berserker accounts once dismissed as myth or exaggeration. Research on stress hormones, endogenous opioids, and altered states has shown that humans are indeed capable of the extraordinary feats described in sagas. The berserkers weren't defying human nature, but accessing its extremes through systematic methods. The study of berserkers has contributed to understanding of dissociative disorders and combat-related mental health. The berserker state shares features with combat-induced dissociation, where warriors perform actions they later can't recall. Understanding these states historically helps contextualize modern combat trauma and develop better treatments. In popular psychology, the concept of the inner berserker has become a metaphor for accessing hidden potential. Self-help literature often uses watered-down versions of berserker imagery, encouraging people to channel their inner warrior or unleash their primal power. While far removed from historical reality, this shows the enduring appeal of the berserker as symbol of transcending limitations. The berserker legacy has influenced modern paganism and Norse revivalist movements. Some groups attempt to reconstruct berserker practices, though safely and symbolically rather than literally. These modern practitioners use drumming, chanting, and ritualized movement to achieve altered states, seeking spiritual transformation rather than combat effectiveness. Academic study of berserkers has contributed to broader understanding of warrior cultures worldwide. Comparative studies show similar practices among various societies: the Aztec jaguar warriors, Celtic warp spasm, Malay amok, and others. The berserker phenomenon appears to be one expression of a broader human capacity for combat transformation found across cultures. The ethical questions raised by berserkers remain relevant as we develop new human enhancement technologies. CRISPR, gene editing, brain-computer interfaces, and pharmaceutical enhancement all promise to expand human capabilities. The berserker experience offers historical perspective on both the potential and dangers of enhancement. They achieved remarkable results, but at significant costs to individuals and society. Military historians study berserker tactics for insights into asymmetric warfare and psychological operations. The terror berserkers inspired often exceeded their actual military impact, a lesson applicable to modern conflict. Understanding how small groups of elite warriors could influence entire campaigns helps analyze contemporary irregular warfare. The berserker legacy challenges modern assumptions about progress and human potential. We often assume we've advanced beyond our ancestors in all ways, but berserkers accessed capabilities that modern humans rarely achieve. Their systematic approach to enhancing combat performance was arguably more sophisticated than current methods in some respects. In literature and media, berserkers have evolved from historical warriors to archetypal figures representing humanity's dual nature. They embody the tension between civilization and wildness control and abandon human and animal. This symbolic richness ensures their continued relevance in storytelling and cultural imagination. The influence extends into mental health treatment, where controlled exposure to stress and systematic desensitization echo berserker training principles. Modern therapy's emphasis on integrating, rather than suppressing, difficult experiences parallels the berserker approach of channeling, rather than eliminating, aggressive impulses. Video game design has particularly embraced berserker mechanics, recognizing their psychological appeal. The temporary power boost, the trade-off between offense and defense, the altered visual states during rage modes, all derive from historical berserker accounts. Millions experience sanitized versions of berserker states through digital media. The fitness industry has adopted berserker imagery and training principles. High-intensity workouts that push participants to extremes, obstacle course races that combine physical and mental challenges, and martial arts programs that emphasize mental transformation alongside physical training all echo berserker methods. Scientific research into human performance limits often references berserkers as historical examples of extreme capability. Studies on hysterical strength, pain suppression, and altered states use berserker accounts as data points for understanding human potential. They represent documented cases of performance that push the boundaries of what we consider possible. The berserker legacy raises uncomfortable questions about violence and human nature. Their effectiveness came from embracing and cultivating aggression rather than suppressing it. In an era that generally promotes emotional control and nonviolence, berserkers remind us that aggression served evolutionary purposes and can be channeled rather than eliminated. Modern military training increasingly recognizes the importance of warrior culture and identity lessons learned partly from studying historical examples like berserkers. The emphasis on unit cohesion, warrior ethos, and cultural traditions that enhance combat effectiveness all reflect understanding gained from analyzing past elite fighters. The philosophical implications of berserker practice continue to generate debate. They demonstrated that human consciousness is more flexible than commonly assumed, that the boundaries between human and animal self and other are more permeable than modern thought typically acknowledges. This challenges fundamental assumptions about identity and capability. In contemporary discussions of toxic masculinity, berserkers present a complex case. They embodied extreme masculine aggression, yet operated within cultural contexts that channeled and limited that aggression. Understanding how Viking society both cultivated and controlled berserker violence offers insights for modern discussions about masculinity and violence. The resurgence of interest in psychedelics for therapeutic purposes has renewed attention to possible pharmacological aspects of berserker practice. Research into psilocybin, MDMA, and other consciousness-altering substances for treating PTSD and depression echoes Viking experimentation with altered states, though, for healing rather than combat. Environmental psychology has found parallels between berserker practices and the benefits of nature exposure. The wilderness isolation that was part of berserker training aligns with modern understanding of nature's psychological benefits. Time in wild places can indeed alter consciousness and enhance certain capabilities, as Vikings intuited. The berserker legacy ultimately forces us to confront the complexity of human potential. They achieved extraordinary capabilities through methods we might find abhorrent, yet their achievements were real. They remind us that human nature contains possibilities, both terrible and remarkable, often inseparably intertwined. As we face future challenges that may require accessing unprecedented human capabilities, from space exploration to climate adaptation, the berserker experience offers both warnings and inspiration. They showed that humans can transform themselves radically when necessity demands, but also that such transformation comes with costs that echo through generations. Conclusion: the eternal berserker. The morning mist has long since lifted from the waters around Lindisfarne, and nearly 13 centuries have passed since berserkers first crashed onto those shores, introducing Europe to warriors who seem to transcend human limitations. Yet their shadow remains not as mere historical curiosity, but as a profound challenge to our understanding of human potential. We have traced their origins in the harsh crucible of the North, where survival demanded extraordinary measures, and the boundaries between human, animal, and divine were understood as permeable. We have examined their training, systematic and brutal, designed to break down normal human limitations and rebuild warriors capable of accessing states that seem supernatural to observers. We have analyzed the science behind their abilities, finding that modern neuroscience validates much of what once seemed mythical. The berserker state, far from being mere legend, represented a sophisticated biotechnology that used the body's own systems to achieve extraordinary performance. Through some combination of training, ritual belief, and possibly pharmaceutical enhancement, they accessed capabilities that remain at the extreme edge of human potential. We have met individual warriors who embodied these traditions. Egil, the berserker poet, whose fury was matched by genius. Harald Hardrada, who channeled berserker abilities into world-spanning conquest. Thorkel, the High, who showed that such capabilities could be combined with strategic brilliance. Each demonstrated that the most fearsome warriors were not mindless brutes, but complex individuals who combined physical prowess with intelligence and adaptability. We have witnessed their decline as Christianity brought new worldviews incompatible with warrior transformation, as military evolution made their tactics obsolete, as centralized states monopolized violence. Their disappearance was not simple defeat, but profound cultural transformation that eliminated the context that made their existence possible. And we have traced their enduring legacy from literature to military training, from sports psychology to philosophical debates about human nature. The berserker remains a powerful symbol and practical inspiration for those seeking to understand and expand human capabilities. But what does their story ultimately mean for us, living in a world that seems impossibly distant from the warrior culture of Viking Age Scandinavia? perhaps more than we might initially think. First, the Berserkers demonstrate that human potential extends far beyond what we normally access. In our comfortable, safe societies, we rarely need to push our limits. The Berserkers remind us that within each human lies capabilities that emerge only under extreme conditions. While we might not want to access these capabilities through violence, knowing they exist expands our understanding of what it means to be human. Second, they show that systematic training can develop abilities that seem superhuman. The Berserkers didn't rely on genetic gifts alone, but developed sophisticated methods for transformation. This suggests that many human limitations are not fixed, but flexible, amenable to training and development. Modern applications, from athletic training to stress inoculation therapy, build on this principle. Third, the Berserkers illustrate the profound influence of belief and culture on human capability. Their transformation required not just physical techniques, but a worldview that made such transformation possible. This highlights how our beliefs about what's possible shape what becomes possible, a principle with implications far beyond combat. Fourth, their story warns of the costs of enhancement. Berserkers achieved remarkable capabilities, but often paid with shortened lives, social isolation, and what we might now recognize as psychological trauma. As we develop new enhancement technologies, their experience counsels careful consideration of trade-offs. Fifth, they demonstrate the importance of meaning and context. Berserker abilities were not random, but served specific cultural purposes within a coherent worldview. Attempts to recreate such capabilities without understanding their context are likely to fail or produce unintended consequences. The Berserkers also challenge modern dichotomies between mind and body, human and animal, individual and collective. They achieved their abilities through practices that integrated all these typically separated elements. Their holistic approach offers lessons for modern attempts at performance enhancement that often focus on single factors. Perhaps most provocatively, the Berserkers force us to question progress narratives that assume we've advanced beyond our ancestors in all ways. In the specific domain of combat performance and altered states, they achieved levels of mastery that remain unmatched. This humbling recognition should make us more curious about what other capabilities our ancestors might have developed that we've lost. Looking forward, the Berserker legacy offers both inspiration and warning as we face future challenges. Climate change, space exploration, and other coming trials may require accessing human capabilities we've rarely needed. The Berserkers show that humans can radically transform when necessity demands, but also that such transformation reshapes society in profound ways. As we develop new technologies for human enhancement, from genetic engineering to brain-computer interfaces, the Berserker experience provides historical perspective. They achieved remarkable enhancements through available technologies, training psychology and pharmacology. But at costs their society eventually deemed unacceptable. Their story counsels both ambition and caution in our own enhancement efforts. The ethical questions they raise remain urgent. Is it acceptable to enhance human capabilities for combat? Where is the line between optimization and dehumanization? How do we balance individual transcendence with social stability? The Vikings answered these questions one way. We must find our own answers for our own time. In our era of increasing interest in consciousness, peak performance, and human potential, the Berserkers offer a historical extreme case. They pushed human transformation further than perhaps any other documented tradition, showing both the heights that can be reached and the prices that must be paid. The terror they inspired came not just from their violence, but from their demonstration that humans could become something more, or perhaps other, than human. This possibility remains simultaneously inspiring and disturbing, promising and threatening. We are still grappling with questions they raised about the nature and limits of humanity. As we face an uncertain future that may demand new forms of human capability, the Berserkers remind us that transformation is possible, but never simple. They achieved the impossible through methods that transformed not just individuals, but entire societies. Their legacy challenges us to think carefully about what transformations we might need and what prices we're willing to pay. The Berserkers were products of their specific time and place, arising from unique confluences of culture, necessity, and possibility. We cannot and should not attempt to recreate them, but we can learn from their experience as we navigate our own challenges and opportunities for transformation. In the end, the most terrifying Viking warriors in history, terrifying not just through their violence, but through their demonstration of human plasticity. They showed that the boundaries we assume are fixed between human and animal possible and impossible, self and other, are more fluid than we typically imagine. This recognition is both threatening and liberating, offering expanded possibilities while undermining comfortable certainties. The mist that obscured Lindisfarne on that fateful morning in 793 was both literal and metaphorical, hiding warriors who embodied human potential pushed to extremes that still challenge our understanding. As we peer back through the mists of time at these terrifying warriors, we see reflected not just historical curiosities, but shadows of what humans can become when pushed beyond all limits. They were not myths. They were men who made themselves into something more than human through methods that worked all too well. Their successes and failures, their transcendence and tragedy, their innovation and obsolescence all speak to eternal human questions about potential purpose and price. The Berserkers are gone, their fury cooled, their transformations ended. But the questions they embodied remain burning. What are humans capable of becoming? What prices are worth paying for transcendence? Where are the limits of human potential, and should we seek to surpass them? These are not questions with easy answers, but the Berserkers ensure we cannot avoid asking them. In their shadow, we confront both the heights and depths of human possibility. They remain terrifying, not just for what they were, but for what they reveal about what we might become. The eternal Berserker lives not in continued violence, but in continued questioning, in the recognition that human nature contains possibilities, both wonderful and terrible, often inseparable. Their legacy is not a path to follow, but a challenge to understand, a reminder that within each human lies potential for transformation that defies easy categorization or comfortable limits. As we face our own transformative challenges, may we learn from both their achievements and their failures, their transcendence and their tragedy. The most terrifying Viking warriors in history have one final lesson to teach: that humans are capable of becoming far more than we imagine, for better and for worse, and that such becoming always carries consequences that echo through centuries. The mist has lifted, but the shadows remain. And in those shadows we glimpse not just the terrifying warriors of the past, but the transformative potential that lies dormant within us, all waiting for the moment when necessity, will, and possibility converge to create something that transcends the merely human. They were the most terrifying warriors in history, not because they were inhuman, but because they were all too human, showing what our species becomes when it pushes itself to the very edges of possibility. In their fury and their fate, we see our own potential for transformation, terrible and magnificent, waiting in the shadows of what we might yet become.